and welcome to this week's edition of the Maine Challenge. This week we continue our conversation about work, about what our work lives are like, about the shifting balance of power between workers and employers by talking with Viva, who inspired the show actually by her talking about this as the Great Strike, the Great General Strike. And we talk with Garrett Martin of the Maine Center for Economic Priorities about what some of this means for us in our daily lives, in the big picture, and in the everyday. Join us. There's lots to chew on here. I am so excited to welcome to the show Viva. And Viva, I don't know if you know this, but you were actually the inspiration for these three shows that we've done, because I think it was a pro-choice rally, and you referred, there's been all this talk in the ether about worker shortages and all that kind of stuff, and then you called it the Great Strike and the Great Worker Strike. And it was just the first time, I don't know if I hadn't been paying attention or you're just way ahead of the curve, when I was thinking, oh my gosh, I've been hearing all the news media talk about it from an employer perspective, but all of a sudden it was like talking about it from a worker perspective. And maybe, just maybe, we are turning the corner and where workers are going to be able to assert some of their rights. So tell me why you call it the Great Strike and the Great Resignation, and tell me what you're thinking about all of this.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me and making me feel like such an inspiration. That's awesome. I have to say, watching people's behavior through this current labor market is really exciting for me. It's a couple of different things happening at once, and it kind of seems like a new awareness or an awakening happening in our culture, or almost like culturally, people from very different demographics are assessing their priorities, which is exciting when you think about all of the news about how divided we are as a country and how scary things got last year, culminating in the January 6th Capitol attack. It seems like, wow, there's really just inalienable divides happening in our culture. But when I see striking workers in healthcare, I see workers leaving the service industries en masse. Manufacturing industries are changing. And not only that, we're seeing Amazon workers and Starbucks workers trying to unionize for the first time in a long time. And the union busting has been really evident in a way that in my adult life, I haven't heard people just talking about conversationally. And on top of that, you have people in tech jobs who are able to transition to working from home, asking, well, now that we're working from home, why would we go back to working in an office? And people, the John Deere right to repair strike, there's so many different kinds of people who are involved in this cultural awareness shift. And that kind of makes me feel like there's a little bit more solidarity than we thought.
Yeah.
Very exciting. And I do feel like we're kind of seeing a validation of the Occupy movement in how COVID has played out in our nation. The billionaires were able to magnify their wealth exponentially in a way that we've never seen happen so blatantly before. And I think when Occupy first started about 10 years ago, it sounded like, there's some hippies camped out in Central Park and they're mad because they don't have legal pot yet. Like, think of how different the world was. And they're saying that there's this wealth divide, but we can really see it now in a way that can't be ignored. And that, combined with safety concerns in service and care industries, and not just physical safety, but emotional safety, where we're seeing, in specifically the care sector, it's taking such a huge emotional toll on healthcare workers to have people treat COVID procedures the way that they did. I think that that's been outlined in several nursing strikes as a part of the burnout that people are feeling. They're doing their best to save people, and yet 700,000 people plus still died. And a lot of that was because of disrespect for good information and disrespect for their care. And we have service industry workers who are essential workers, but at the same time that they're being told they're essential, the profit concern is a bigger deal for the companies in mind. And I'm thinking of, big box stores, big chain restaurants. The profit motivation is stronger than the motivation to keep employees healthy, and people are seeing that.
Yeah.
I
Well, and I think, I think it's a really interesting thing because we've talked about, and I've talked about for a long time, that the divide, the surface divide is right and left, right? But the real divide is up and down. And as you said, we are seeing that divide and in like Technicolor, like we are seeing it in such stark terms that we have never seen it. And I think you're speaking to the unionizing efforts and Kellogg and all these places where the companies are making billions and billions and billions of profits are just going out of sight. And yet somehow we have gotten away from the idea that when you do well as a company, the first order of business is to invest in your employees. And like we have somehow treated labor as their easy come, easy go. It's okay if their wages stagnate for a decade, and I think you're right. I think we are starting to see that. And that might be where the solidarity comes from. And that would be very exciting.
It sure would. It's interesting watching two people in, so I worked in the service industry for a long time, and I briefly worked in offices and startups and some nonprofits. And I've never really had my peers speak about unionization to the level that they are now. And what's really wild to me is people are talking about unionization and noticing the very direct union busting tactics of Amazon last year, Starbucks this year, HelloFresh. There's so many. There's so many all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And I think a true general strike, and as far as I've been able to tell from looking back through history, really would take massive mutual aid coordination and leadership from the major unions. And union membership is down from like 30% to 6% nationwide. It's like an all-time low. But because of that, the unions would have to negotiate at the end of their contracts to do a strike. Mm-hmm. And because union membership is so low because of union busting tactics, we're kind of seeing people just decide to withdraw their labor from places that it's not being rewarded on their own, which is really inspiring to me.
Right. They're calling, there's now the labor, I just found this out today, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has a name for it. It's called the quits.
I love that.
And so the quits are people who are just some are voluntarily quitting, many because they have to, because of no daycare and circumstances and not being safe and burnout. But another piece is people who think, you know what? I can do better than this. I can find a job where I'm respected. I can find a job where I'm going to get paid better, and so people for the first time in decades are saying, you know what? Take this job and shove it, because I'm going to go find something else. And I think I think you're right. Even absent of formal union membership, which I think will start to increase, but absent that, people are talking with their feet, and they're just saying, I'm out. I talked to a friend yesterday who just said, you know what? I just realized I'm being treated terribly. I'm giving my notice today. And it was so empowering for her. And she wasn't afraid, like, oh, I'll never get another job, or, I have to hold on to the crumbs here. It was like, I am valuable, I am worthy, and I'm going to find a job that meets that worth. And that's like a cultural revolution, right?
It truly is. I appreciate that you brought up that some of what's forcing people out of the labor market are concerns like childcare. Mm-hmm. Because on the one hand, there's the empowerment of, wait a minute, I do deserve so much more than this. And on the other hand, people who are primary caregivers have been cut out of the workforce more intensively. Right. But on the other hand, that is requiring people to finesse mutual aid, like very small mutual aid organizations within their friend and family groups. Right. And that seems like a net positive, well, maybe not a net positive, but a tiny positive in light of the big problem.
Well, and it's a community, a potential kind of community builder, and the sort of that we're all in this together ultimately, even though we've like to say, oh, childcare, that's your problem. Oh, this, healthcare, that's your problem, but it might be that thing. It might be that thing that knits us together.
It just might. I would also like to, just while we have the space, I've had a number of people ask me like, well, where's everybody going if nobody's working? Which I think is a little bit a misleading way to diagnose the situation, because I don't think that it's necessarily that people are quitting en masse and just sitting around playing Xbox. I think what we're seeing is that people are changing industries. A lot of people in the service industry who tend to be overqualified for the kind of physical labor that they're doing are finding ways to maximize on the skills that they got in, say, the colleges that they went to, or the hard skills that they've been building along the way. And also, this is terrifically exciting to me, the stimulus that we got, I think, really proved people who don't think about economics, it proved the theory of the velocity of money in a really specific way. So the stimulus, first of all, gave a lot of people a chance to save money for the first time, for some people in their adult lives, which kind of speaks to the lie of like the Reaganism trickle down economics,
yes, right.
and putting, character aspersions on people who don't have money. Well, it turns out that if people do have access to regular steady money, they will spend it. They'll spend it locally, and they'll save it, which empowers them to make different choices. Right. That was really exciting for me to see.
That is totally exciting. And we are seeing more people start their own businesses than ever before. So, but on that note, I mean, it's unbelievable, but we have to wrap up. But I want to say, Viva, I want to have you back. I want to have you back as to talk more about this and your experiences and what's happening with you, but also as your incredible role as a brilliant singer. And if you do not know Viva as a performer, she is an incredible musician. If you get the chance to go see her anywhere, go see her, listen to her, find her, go to her website, because you are awesome. And so I am so grateful. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And there's so much more to say. So we will make a time to do that.
I'm so happy to see you. Thank you so much, Betsy.
Thank you. And now we are very happy to also have with us as our final guest, Garrett Martin. And Garrett is the executive director of the Maine Center for Economic Policy and is brilliant around the economy and has been commenting a little bit as we've been going. Garrett, thank you so much for joining us. I want to ask you two quick questions. One is, in those jobs in which they are dependent on government pay, so nursing homes, mental health facilities, where we have desperate need in mental health, we have empty beds because we can't get enough workers, not because we aren't paying, because the state is not reimbursing providers at a rate that competes with McDonald's or Walmart, let alone anybody else. So is there a way we can talk about and at the Center for Economic Policy? Have you guys thought about that, or how do we get the government to catch up with this lag?
Yeah, no, boy, you got a good one here. How big a fish do you want to play with right now?
I know.
I mean, the way we talk about it, and this is certainly probably not the best sort of way to do so, is we have a class of jobs in this country that are effectively publicly subsidized low-wage jobs.
Yeah.
And, I have friends who work in healthcare and long-term care facilities who have said, like, why am I doing this job that is physically so demanding and that is draining emotionally when I can earn the same amount of money working, in some other retail job or that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think you're right. While Maine has certainly made some improvements in acknowledging that we are underpaying workers, it is still, you're woefully below where it needs to be to both be able to attract and retain those workers.
Yeah.
And to be able to make sure that they're paid at a level that allows them to provide for their families. Now, at the same time, the facilities that are providing that care also can do a better job of making sure they're supporting their workers on the job.
Right.
And, it's not just about what your hospital CEO is getting paid, for instance, and how they feel about their job, but it's also about what your frontline nurse or, the cleaning service people who are making sure that every operating room is actually safe, and so I think you've nailed something on the head, because whether you think about healthcare, Medicare payments, Medicaid payments, that covers a significant share of costs, whether you're talking about long-term care and those facilities, or childcare, or even education.
Yeah, right. No, absolutely.
What we pay teachers is based on public funding. And so here's the dirty little part of this, Betsy.
Okay.
In order to get at this, right, then you and I are not bashful about this, but we have to be willing to have a conversation about, first of all, acknowledging this problem, which I think people increasingly do, particularly as they see that loved ones are having a hard time getting those services, right?
Yeah.
Or I can't go to work now because I got to care for my mother-in-law or for my child. because that facility just shut down on Deer Owl or whatever.
Yeah, right.
But I think that the reality here is we also have to be willing to take a hard look at, are we raising enough revenue? Do we have a tax system that is adequate to provide the kinds of investments in our economy and in our people that are ultimately going to help everybody have a better economic outcomes and a better quality of life? And it's pretty clear there's a lot of money that's been left on the table in terms of what corporations and different classes of investors can do. So that's the problem, is everybody sort of is willing to say, oh yeah, we should pay these people more. Well, it's like, okay, let's really have an honest conversation about that. And that means we need to talk about how we're going to raise the money to pay those people more.
Exactly. Okay, well, I'm with you for that conversation. No, that's different for sure. Okay, so now here's the last question for you. And I left this a doozy, right? And this is the one that we hear. This is one of the same things we hear all the time too, which is so many people, even smart, educated, with it people, say that people don't want to work because they're making so much money on unemployment that they just don't want to go back to work. And that's what we're doing. And so what we have to do is yank all that unemployment money, any of the supplemental stuff that was paid during COVID, right? So help us. Help us tell us why that is not actually the case.
Well, okay. So, Betsy, first of all, me, I'm a wonk swonk. So I like the data.
Yep.
But I'm also, a pragmatist and a person. So I also like the human side of this stuff. But the wonk part of me says the data doesn't support that view.
Right.
In a couple of different ways. First of all, we heard during the pandemic about all these states that said, oh yeah, our business community has told us that they can't get workers, and it's all because of this very generous unemployment insurance program. And so what we should do is we should strip that away, and then because we're starving people, they'll go back into the workplace and all will be right with the world. Voila. Well, it turns out the data didn't support it, because the states that stripped away those benefits didn't see any significant bump in workers reentering the labor force.
Right.
It was hardly discernible, the difference between their experience and what we saw in states like Maine, where we recognize that, hold on a second, this economy only works when people can get jobs that allow them to provide for their families and feel safe on the job, and that they're getting unemployment insurance, but that is not what is keeping them from working. That is what's allowing them to survive, so that they will be ready to work when the opportunity presents itself that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. And, the other piece is a job is the greatest source of security someone can have. Yeah. Most people who are on unemployment insurance got there because why? Oh, they were working before and they lost their job. Yeah. You don't get unemployment insurance because you just willy-nilly decided you didn't want to work and you wanted to go collect this money and no longer have to work. That's not the way it works. So that's part of the answer. The other part that's a little more devilish is it turns out that when you look at some of these interesting pilot projects that are happening around universal basic income and providing people with a baseline level of support for themselves and their families, it turns out, similar to the earned income tax credit, that when you boost the incomes of low income earning families, you don't actually reduce how much they work. It turns out you actually see an increase in how much they work.
Absolutely.
So again, the data just doesn't support this idea that people are sitting on the sidelines, sort of that stereotype. And let's acknowledge this too. That stereotype is racist in its origins.
Absolutely.
And, this idea that people are sitting on the sidelines, living off the dole and all that other stuff, look, I get it. I get people who live in sort of hard scrabble situations and they look at their neighbor and they say, he's getting something I'm not getting, and clearly that's the problem here. No, the problem is that neither of you are able to get jobs that are allowing you to provide for your families and give you access to healthcare and allow you to step away when you need to take care of your kids or that kind of thing.
Right.
I mean, we had a huge number of people who were on unpaid furlough in Maine.
Yep.
During the pandemic, who weren't getting unemployment insurance.
Yes, okay.
Those people wanted to work.
Yeah.
So anyway, great question.
Well, I know. I thought I'd give you an easy one. But then, and then there's the morality part of it, which you said, which is it our position that really we want to starve people into going back to work? Like, is that what we want? And so, and I just want to say about the guaranteed income. So Maine Challenge, we did an incredible show. So if you go to our YouTube channel, Maine Challenge, and you look at our show, we did it with Carol Wishcamper and the folks at the
Magnolia,
Mothers Project, and we did it. So if you don't know about this guaranteed income issue, please go watch that show because it's so inspiring. And just as you said, but the best part is, I have to say this again because it's my favorite part. So when I asked Aisha, the woman who runs the program, what the most unexpected thing was for her, the most profound thing, she said that people had room in their lives for joy.
Yeah.
And so I feel like, you know what, when we see this balance of power start to shift, when we see that workers actually are starting to demand that they not only have a job, but that they have a job that can allow them to be with and care for their families, to have leisure time, to actually have something other than just a job in their lives, maybe that's the balance. Maybe that's the joy we're looking for. And maybe that's the silver lining of what's happening in this economy. So
yeah, and Betsy, just two quick things. First of all, I actually lived and worked in Jackson, Mississippi for several years before moving to Maine. So I know Aisha, and they're doing such amazing work there. And the beauty of what they're doing is it's also been very well evaluated.
Yes.
So it's phenomenal what's happening there. I think the other thing though that you just triggered is, there's a great piece of research that I oftentimes trot out when I'm talking to groups, which is what happens to the lifetime earnings potential of a kid who is growing up in an under-resourced household when you boost the income of that family. And there's long-term data that shows in a family that's earning $25,000 or less, and they have a kid under the age of 5, if you can boost that family's income by $3,000 a year, the lifetime earning potential of that kid over time goes up by about 17 to 18%. Now, what is that about? It's about all that rich early brain development stuff that's happening and the dynamics in play when a family is living on an edge and has all kinds of stressors and has all kinds of challenges meeting, basic needs. And if you can alleviate some of those stressors and provide some of the resources that allow them to meet some of those needs, even if not every single dollar you give to that family goes to the direct benefit of the kid, there is still other indirect benefits that accrue to that child. The impact over time is amazing. And so that's another case and an argument for why it is we should really be taking the lessons we're learning now. And I guarantee you, what's happening with this child tax credit and families that are getting $300 a month for children under a certain age, if we can continue that program, I think the longer term economic consequences of that are going to be tremendous because of the number of kids that are being lifted out of poverty and the reduction, the improvements to sort of brain development, those kinds of things. So anyway, as you know, I could pontificate for hours, but I really appreciate you having me on. And
I really appreciate you being on. And I just want to say that it really is, we're ending on that perfect note of work. We don't live to work. We are human beings, not human doings. And when we have the opportunity and get the stressors, the economic stressors out of our lives so that we can actually be human beings, spend more times with our kids. One of the women from that project who said, I got to have a birthday party for my kid for the first time.
Yeah.
That kind of quality of life is what this is all about. So everybody, as we look at work, we want to make sure we have living wages, we have policies, paid leave, and time off, and all of those things that just seem like basic respect that they do almost everywhere else in the world, except for here. And so this is our moment. This may be our moment to organize both on the policy level and at the workplace to make sure that work and family and us is something that we can all live with and thrive. So Thank you, Garrett, for being with us. So I want to sound off again about work, more specifically about our relationship to work. During this pandemic, the situation in the workplace has been called the Great Resignation, the Great Quits. People are called quits, and all the things, the Great Strike. But I want to think about this pause, this unrequested but apparently very necessary pause that the pandemic has given all of us. I want to think about it as maybe the great reset in our relationship to work. Because for decades, work has been held as the high and mighty thing in our lives, the most important thing in our lives. So we are now in a place where instead of working to live, we are living to work. And we center our entire lives and what's important and set our priorities around work. What if we reset and made work take its rightful place in the balance between our lives, our communities, our families, our relationship to all of that? And what we actually seek is balance. Not glorifying people who worked 60, 70 hours a week or come home at 2 a.m. and saying, oh, aren't they the best hard worker? Isn't that awesome? Well, no. We say, oh, isn't it sad that their family is losing out, or their personal life is losing out, or their community is losing out on those skills, right? In Portugal, they just passed a law that said that bosses can't email their employees or call them after 6 p.m. during the week or on weekends at all. That's a country that actually says, yeah, the balance is really important, not just with their words, but with their policy. So imagine if we built into every workplace flexibility, the ability to go take care of your family when they're sick through paid leave or through anything else, but just allowed us to say, yes, this is really important, or allowed us to go to a school concert or a kid's game, or to help a friend who is in need and say, yeah, that's really important. That's a part of what we value, and allowed us to engage in our communities in social service and helping people out. And not just when there's a crisis, but as a matter of course. And we allowed to use those incredible skills that we have for our communities and our families, as well as for our workplace. Imagine a 4-day work week. Why not? It's the time of miracles. This time of year is the time of miracles. So we have this incredible pause forced upon us by COVID and the pandemic, and this time of miracles. So let's use this increasing understanding that our work lives are all out of balance, that our relationship of employers to workers is all out of balance, the divide between rich and poor is out of balance, and let's set it right. Let's do the great reset and have work take its rightful place as a piece of what we do and who we are, but not as the whole thing. Wouldn't that be a miracle?